Didn't want me to start on her, so she said, so I'm going to preach tonight. Don't forget the soul winning class tomorrow night. I'm really enjoying that. I'm really enjoying the fellowship, but I'm enjoying the lessons. And one thing I really appreciated about it is because it's trained us to do what the church was called to do. That's all we're doing. It's something we should have done years ago. It's something that we should have been doing all along, and I really feel good about it. I remember hearing a story one time and it was just a story, and I think it was a children's story, I'm not sure, but it said the Lord, after he was crucified and he went back to glory, and it said one of the archangels said, "Well, Lord, you went to planet Earth like you were supposed to do." And he said, "Yes, I did." He said, "You died on the cross like you were supposed to." And he said, "Yes, I did." And he said, "Now you've been resurrected." He said, "Yes, I have." And he said, "Well, how are you going to get this message out that you died on the cross for the sins of the world?" And the Lord said, "Well, I told 12 men, and they can tell 12 men. Then those 12 men can tell 12 men. Then those 12 can tell 12 men, all down through time." And the angel said, "Well, Lord, what if those 12 men don't tell 12 men?" And the Lord said, "I don't have an alternate plan." God don't have an alternate plan, folks. It's up to us. We're supposed to witness. I want to tell you tonight about 6 brothers. Turn, if you will, to Luke. The 16th chapter. I want to tell you in particular about one of the brothers. There's not a lot said about him, although we do know he was a religious man. We know that he was a rich man. The Bible doesn't say he was a bad man. It doesn't say he was a good man. But he was probably at least an average citizen. And we know that he had friends because he gave dinner parties. And if you got money, you'll have friends, right? And so he was well thought of by some, maybe well thought of by most. And I'm sure it's a man that was greatly loved by his synagogue. We know that he was a Jew and that he went to synagogue. And this man had 5 brothers. Now this man had the same problem that most men have, is they don't really give a whole lot of thought about death. They don't take it all that serious. And just about any religion will do as long as you're healthy. Isn't that amazing? I remember an evangelist one time. He's preached at this church way back in the 50s, and his name was Jack Thompson. And there was a rich man that he was always witnessing to, and the rich man didn't like Jack at all. In fact, he kept telling him, he said, "I go to church." And he went to a big uptown church, and one that wasn't considered a fundamental church, but it was one that would look up to him because he was rich in the amount of money he gave, and he was very prestigious in this church. But the man found himself on his deathbed one day, and he asked, he said, "I want to see the preacher." And so they brought his preacher, and his preacher came in, and he said, "Not you." He said, "You're all right to play golf with," but he said, "I'm dying now." He said, "I want to see Jack Thompson." You see, when it came right down to it, he realized that all of the religion he had was just a facade, that it wouldn't bridge the gap. And you stop and think about it. Really, a person is fortunate if they're not saved if they can die a lingering death. Now you think about that. And so many people, they die of what we call a terrible disease that's long and drawn out. But you see, if they're not saved, at least they've got time to think about it. They've got time to realize that they're not long here. But what about the people that just fall over dead? Now, it tells about this man. In fact, it tells about two men that died. One was named Lazarus, and the main character is a rich man. It doesn't give his name. It just says he's a rich man. But it does say that Lazarus died and was buried. No, it doesn't say that. It says the rich man died and was buried. And it says that Lazarus died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. Now, I can just kind of imagine, and I want you to stop and think about it. We know he was a Jew. We know his religion because he was a praying man and he prayed to Father Abraham. Now, only a Jew would pray to Father Abraham. So we know he was a Jew. It was in that time when the Jews would go to synagogue. Now, I can just imagine the rest of the family when word was brought to them that their brother had died. And perhaps he had died suddenly. It doesn't say, it just said he died and was buried. But I just imagine, and if you were there, and if I were there at the church service, the funeral service for him, there's no doubt much was made about the amount of money that he gave and all of the benevolence that he did, and oh, what a great man that he was, and how much he'd be missed by his church and by his family and by his community. And I can just see his family all sitting there together, all of his 5 brothers. But the Bible says that he died and was buried. Now, all of a sudden, he was brought face to face with reality. You see, people today don't want to think about hell. In fact, do you realize that people think that if they can joke about something, it kind of takes the seriousness away? And so they'll tell jokes about heaven, they'll tell jokes about hell, they'll tell jokes about God, about death, as if that's not going to, it takes the sharp edge off, where it's not maybe all that real or it isn't all that tragic. But look what happened immediately. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments. And he said, where's all my money? Where's all my prestige? He didn't say anything like that. He said that he saw Lazarus in Abraham's bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. Now here's something that's tragic. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Do you know what he's saying here, folks? Death is a reality, and death is final. If you die saved, you're saved. If you die lost, you're lost. Now, the rich man could have said, yes, but Father Abraham, I did the best I could, and I went to synagogue, and after all, I was just listening to the preach and the priest, and I thought I had done all that I was to do. I gave my money, and I was good to my neighbors, and I did all these things. But you see, that's all in the past. That's all done away forever. It's too late for the rich man. Now, I want you to just stop and consider just a second when the rich man was in hell. Now, immediately when he was in hell, it says that he was in torments. Immediately he was in great pain, and immediately he was in great thirst. Immediately he cried out for mercy and a drop of water. But imagine the torment and the anguish when he realized there indeed was a great gulf fixed, and that where he was at that point in time, he would be there in 1994, and he'd be there throughout eternity without God and without hope. I'll tell you one thing it did to him. It really made him pray. And do you realize he prayed for something that Christ said that we should be praying for? That we don't? He said, pray the Lord of the harvest would send forth laborers. Now look what he did. First of all, he had to come to the point and realize there is no hope for me. And that's tragic. There's nothing, I guess, as sad as no hope. No hope. I remember several years ago, I don't remember heard it on the radio or whether I read it in the newspaper, I don't remember, but a little girl was over to her grandmother's house. And her grandmother had a castor bean plant. How many know what that is? I know there's some around, and I don't understand that, because the castor bean is a deadly poison, and there's no antidote for castor bean poisoning. And this little granddaughter had picked one of these beans and chewed on it and got very sick, and they took her to the doctor. The doctor rushed her to the hospital, and they wired around the world to try and find an antidote for castor bean poisoning. And the word came back, no antidote. Now I want you to stop and think about it. Can you imagine how hard that would be as a doctor to go to those parents and say, I'm sorry, there's no hope for your little girl? Can you imagine how hard that would be on the grandmother when that doctor said, I'm sorry, there's no antidote? No hope. No hope. Imagine, if you can, and I don't know whether the rich man is over the shock of it yet or not, the fact that there's no hope. Now, all of us before, at some time or other, probably have thought about eternity. Has everybody here thought about eternity? Have you ever done that? I know I have. It's kind of like how high is up? When I was a little child in the summertime, and we'd be out playing in the yard, and it'd be at night, we'd put a blanket on the grass, and it'd sit there with the neighbor kids, 8 or 9, probably 9:30 at night, because it'd be dark. And we'd look at the stars, and we'd get to talk about how high is up, and there's just no end to it. And you say, yeah, but on the other side, I mean, it's like there's got to be a ceiling. Isn't that right? See, your mind can't compute it. And that's how long is forever. Now stop and think about it. The rich man has been there 2,000 years, but he's not one day less to serve than when he began. He's not 1 second closer to termination than when he began. It just goes on and on and on and on. And that dawned on him as that just kept drumming in his mind. Hopeless, hopeless, damned forever, torment, walls without end throughout eternity. Then he said, oh, Abraham, send Lazarus to my 5 brethren and warn them that they don't come to this place of torment. I just wonder what would happen if God would, and he won't, if God released the inhabitants of hell for 24 hours on planet Earth. You'd hear preaching like you ain't never heard before. And the theme of every sermon would be the realities of eternal damnation in a devil's hell. But why don't we witness? Oh, I'll tell you what, the rich man wishes to God we had witnessed. He wished to God someone would warn his 5 brothers. Now, the rich man could see Lazarus. And I just wonder if he could see his 5 brothers going to synagogue every Sabbath, but going down the same road that he was going down. I read something a while ago. It says, who in hell cares if you perish? And the answer is, everybody in hell cares if you perish. They don't want you there. They don't want you there. But we meet people every day. We work beside people every day. And here's something that's startling. Every once in a while you hear of a hero, someone walking down the street, and he'll run into a burning inferno to rescue some child. We've all heard stories like that, haven't we? Or run in front of a train to snatch some child out of the path of a locomotive, or do some heroic deed to save human life. And that's great. But why will we do so much to save a human life when we're not concerned at all about that human's soul? Yesterday I was going to work, and I saw a car wreck had just happened, and they had a guy laid out there, and an ambulance pulled up, and they had a neck brace on him, and somebody else was thrown through the windshield, and boy, cars are just screeching up, and they're all stopping, and everybody jumping out and running over like, what can I do? Oh, anything I can do? You know, that's the way people do. And I think that's great. That's the way it ought to be. But what if we're that alarmed about people going to hell? Listen, if that man is killed in a car wreck, he just killed instantly. That's it. Terminates life on this planet. But if he's not saved, what a tragedy. And we work with and talk with people every day that's walking a tightrope over hell, one heartbeat away from eternity, and we never warn them. Isn't that terrible? That's terrible. We become very selfish. Very selfish. I'm as guilty as anybody. I'm so glad I'm saved, and my wife and my children and my dear old mother, and I know my daddy's in heaven. Let's go to church and let's just sing praises to God because my little bunch is in. And that seems to be all we're just really very concerned about. Isn't that right? Now you think about that. But why? Why? I remember some time ago there was a man went bird hunting, and he was up in years. He went quail hunting. And he didn't come back in, and it was getting dark, and his wife was alarmed about him, and she called one of his friends, and the friends called some other friends, and pretty soon it got all over town that this man, it was getting late, and it was already the sun was setting, and they knew he was old, he had a little bit of heart trouble, and they said he went bird hunting, and he went to a certain particular area, and they got up a search party, and everybody got their Coleman lanterns and their flashlights, and they stayed out till 1 o'clock in the morning hunting for and searching for, and found that poor man that died of a heart attack. But whole town will turn out in a search party to hunt for someone like that. But why are we unconcerned about whether he went to heaven or hell? I'll tell you why. Because we really don't believe it. We study about heaven, we study about hell, but it's really not real. We know it up here, but we don't know it down here. You know, I think it would be so good for the church if each one of us would get off for 2 hours alone with God, close our minds, and just think about hell and the agony and the reality of the people that will spend eternity there. Then look at your friends and say, if I don't warn them, they'll probably be there. And there's my children. If I don't warn them, they'll probably be there. And the people that I work with will probably be there because I don't warn them. It's not real to us. How can I tell it's not real? Because someone will die, and maybe they've been suffering for a long time, and they'll die, and somebody say, well, at least they're not suffering anymore. How do you know that? But we act just because they quit breathing, the heart stopped, they're not suffering anymore. But the first question we should ask is, were they saved? If the answer is no, we should say, oh God, it's too bad they died. Because I'll tell you what, the worst physical pain and torturing they could go through here doesn't even begin to compare to what happened when their heartbeat stopped and they dropped into a devil's hell. I don't care how much pain they're in, they'd be far better off if they kept them on life support systems forever than to pull the plug and let them drop into a devil's hell. Because there's no coming back. There's no coming back. And do you know what Jesus said? Jesus said, tell them to come in here. No, he didn't. He said, go and tell. Isn't that right? Nowhere does Christ tell us to bring people into the church to hear the gospel. You won't find it. But he does say to the church, go into all the world and preach the gospel. And we're not doing it. And so do you know what the church does since they don't want to do what God tells them to do? They improvise. Well, let's start this program, and let's start this movement, and let's start this program, and we got this program going, and we got this little organization. We do all those things, and we're still not reaching the world because we're not taking the gospel to the lost, dying world. And do you know that's a sin? Let me read you something real quick. We all remember the story in 2 Kings about Samaria when it's in the 6th chapter, when Samaria, when it was besieged by Syria. And the armies surrounded this city, and they were starving to death. They were eating their own children. And there were 4 lepers there at the gate. And the reason is at the gate they couldn't come in the city because that was the law. They had to separate. They had to stay back from the people that didn't have leprosy. And look what the 4 lepers said. One of them said, okay, and there, this is chapter 7, 3rd verse. And there were 4 leprous men at the entering into the gate, and they said one to another, why sit here until we die? If we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city. In other words, it wouldn't do any good if we did go in the city. They're starving to death just as well. There's nothing to eat in there. If we say we will enter into the city, then the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit still here, we will die also. Now therefore come and let us fall into the host of the Syrians. If they save us alive, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall but die. In other words, there's no point in going in the city. They're starving to death. We'll die there. And if we go to the enemy camp, who knows? They might feed us. They might kill us. But we're going to die anyway. What do we got to lose? And they rose up in the twilight to go into the camp of the Syrians. And when they were come to the uttermost part of the camp of Syria, behold, there was no man there. For the Lord had made the host of the Syrians to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, even the noise of a great host. And they said one to another, Lo, the king of Israel hath hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to come upon us. Wherefore they rose and fled in the twilight, and left their tents and their horses and their asses, even the camp as it was, and fled for their life. And when these lepers came to the uttermost part of the camp, they went into one tent, and did eat and drink, and carried thence silver and gold and raiment, and went and hid it. And came again, and entered into another tent, and carried thence also, and went and hid it. Notice this. Then they said one to another, We do not well. This day is a day of good tidings, and we hold our peace. If we tarry till the morning light, some mischief will come upon us. Now therefore come, that we may go and tell the king's household. You know what they said? Our whole city is perishing. Here we've eaten this food. We're hiding the gold and the silver. They said, this isn't right. This is a day of good tidings. We can save our families. We can save our city. And if we wait, mischief will come upon us. In other words, they're saying, it's urgent, folks. There's people in the city that's starving to death moment by moment. And here we are, hiding gold, hiding silver, eating the food. And this is a day of good tidings. And here we go on about our life, about our hobbies, about our wants, about our pleasures. We've eaten of the bread of life, we drink of the water of life, but we're not telling anybody. And this is the day of good tidings, folks. There's hope for the lost. I heard a man say, witnessing is just one poor beggar telling another poor beggar where he found bread. And that's all it is. Now you think about it. Here we have eternal life. And we work with and live next to and have next door neighbors, have family that don't know Jesus, and we'll just not even open our mouth. Won't say a word to them about it. You know why? We don't want to offend them. I've heard that till I'm sick of it. Well, I don't want to offend them. No, you don't want to offend them. You'd rather just let them go to hell because you don't want to offend them. Wouldn't that be something if you went to the doctor and you had a deadly disease? I mean, it's scary, Walter. But the doctor had a cure for it. And he goes to your mother and say, Miss Dickie, Your son's dying. He's got this dreaded disease. But I've got the cure. And guess what? The cure is a simple